June 18, 1815. The fields south of Brussels are a sea of mud. A torrential downpour the night before has turned the ground into a quagmire, a soggy, treacherous mess that will shape the destiny of Europe. This is the stage for the Battle of Waterloo, the final, desperate gamble of one of history's most brilliant and controversial figures, Napoleon Bonaparte. Just 100 days earlier, Napoleon had stunned the world. Escaping from exile on the island of Elba, he landed in France with a small band of followers. The army sent to arrest him instead flocked to his banner. King Louis XVIII fled, and the emperor was once again master of France. But the great powers of Europe, Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia were not about to let him reclaim his throne. They declared him an outlaw and mobilized their armies to crush him once and for all. Napoleon knew his only chance was to strike first, to defeat his enemies one by one before they could unite their overwhelming forces. His target was the Anglo-Allied army under the Duke of Wellington and the Prussian army under Gebhard von Blücher, both camped in modern-day Belgium. He moved with his trademark speed, catching them by surprise. On June 16, he engaged both armies separately. At the Battle of Ligny, he dealt a heavy blow to the Prussians, forcing them to retreat. At the same time, at Quatre-Bras, his Marshal Ney fought Wellington's forces to a standstill. Napoleon believed he had the Prussians on the run, and he dispatched a third of his army under Marshal Grouchy to pursue them and prevent them from rejoining Wellington. It was a fateful decision. Now, on this wet Sunday morning, Napoleon faces Wellington's army, which has taken up a strong defensive position on a ridge. Napoleon is confident. "I tell you," he remarked to his generals, "that Wellington is a bad general, the English are bad troops, and this affair is nothing more than eating breakfast." He delayed the start of the battle, waiting for the ground to dry. He needed firm ground for his artillery to be effective and for his cavalry to charge. This delay, however, would prove costly. It gave the battered Prussians precious time to regroup and march to Wellington's aid. Around 11:30 a.m., the battle begins. The French artillery roars to life, unleashing a massive bombardment on the Allied lines. The first major French attack is aimed at the Château Hougoumont, a fortified farmhouse on Wellington's right flank. Napoleon intended it as a diversion, to draw in Wellington's reserves. But the fight for Hougoumont quickly escalates into a brutal battle within a battle. French soldiers throw themselves against the stone walls, but the British and German defenders hold on with grim determination, understanding that if Hougoumont falls, the entire Allied line could collapse. For hours, the farmhouse is a scene of carnage, with men fighting hand-to-hand in the courtyards and orchards. As the struggle for Hougoumont rages, Napoleon launches his main infantry assault on Wellington's center-left. Under the command of General Darlan, nearly 20,000 French infantrymen march forward in massive columns. They advance steadily through the rye fields, a formidable blue wave rolling towards the Allied ridge. They push back the Dutch-Belgian troops at the front, and for a moment, it looks like the Allied line will break. But Wellington has a surprise waiting. At the last moment, he orders his British infantry, who had been lying down on the reverse slope of the ridge to shelter from artillery fire, to stand up and fire. A devastating volley at point-blank range rips through the front ranks of the French columns. Before the French can recover, Wellington unleashes his heavy cavalry. The British Household Cavalry and Union Brigade thunder down the slope, smashing into the disordered French infantry. The charge is incredibly successful at first, scattering Darlan's corps and sending them reeling back in panic. But the British cavalry, caught up in the thrill of the chase, lose their discipline. They gallop too far, charging all the way to the French artillery batteries. There, exhausted and disorganized, they are counterattacked by French lancers and cuirassiers. The glorious charge turns into a disaster, with the British heavy brigades suffering massive casualties. Both sides have taken a heavy punch, and the center of the battlefield becomes a stalemate. With his infantry attack repulsed, Napoleon turns to his cavalry. Around 4 p.m., believing he saw signs of the Allied center wavering, Marshal Ney, the bravest of the brave, makes a fateful decision without direct orders from Napoleon. He leads a colossal cavalry charge, perhaps the largest in history. Thousands of armored cuirassiers, lancers, and dragoons surge up the muddy slope towards the Allied ridge. But Wellington's infantry is prepared. They form into defensive squares. These are tightly packed formations of men, presenting a hedge of bayonets in every direction. The French cavalry are like a wave breaking against a rock. They can flow around the squares, but they cannot break them. The horsemen slash with their sabers and fire their pistols, but the disciplined infantry volleys cut them down. For nearly 2 hours, Ney leads charge after charge, but each one fails, littering the slope with dead and wounded men and horses. It is a magnificent, but ultimately futile, display of courage. The flower of the French cavalry is destroyed against the unbreakable British squares. Meanwhile, a new threat emerges. On the French right flank, the first troops of the Prussian army begin to appear. Napoleon is forced to divert vital troops, including his young guard, to hold them back. He knows time is running out. He must break Wellington's line before Blücher's full army arrives. He has one last card to play, the Imperial Guard. These are his elite, veteran soldiers, the best troops in the French army, who had never known defeat in battle. Around 7:30 p.m., as the sun begins to set, Napoleon commits his old guard. They march forward in their tall bearskin hats, an aura of invincibility surrounding them. The entire French army watches, their hopes pinned on these legendary soldiers. They advance under a hail of canister and musket fire, aiming for the weakest point in Wellington's line. They push back the British guards, and victory seems within Napoleon's grasp. But Wellington himself is there to rally his men. He brings up reinforcements, and a fresh brigade of British infantry that had been lying in wait delivers a crushing volley. The unthinkable happens. The Imperial Guard falters. They stop. Then, they begin to fall back. A cry goes through the French ranks, "La Garde recule." The Guard retreats. The psychological impact is devastating. If the invincible Guard can be beaten, then all is lost. The morale of the French army, already strained by a long and bloody day, shatters completely. As the Guard retreats in disorder, Wellington stands in his stirrups and waves his hat in the air, the signal for a general advance. The entire Allied line surges forward. At the same time, the Prussians finally break through on the French right flank, adding to the chaos. The French army dissolves into a panicked rout. Soldiers throw down their weapons and flee for their lives, pursued relentlessly by the Prussian cavalry throughout the night. Napoleon watches the catastrophe unfold from a small elevation. His dream of a restored empire is turning into a nightmare before his eyes. Surrounded by the last loyal squares of his guard, he is forced from the battlefield, a fugitive once again. The Battle of Waterloo is over. It has been a damn near run thing, as Wellington would later say. The cost was immense. Over 40,000 French soldiers and over 20,000 Allied and Prussian soldiers were killed or wounded on that single, bloody day. The battle marked the definitive end of the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon abdicated for a second and final time and surrendered to the British. They exiled him to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he would die 6 years later. The Battle of Waterloo redrew the map of Europe and ushered in a century of relative peace, dominated by the powers that had finally defeated the French emperor. It was a day of mud, courage, tactical genius, and fatal errors, a day that ended an era and shaped the world we live in today. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey into history, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.